Uh, you know, I'm glad to be here with you today. Today, I'm going to be doing a solo by myself. The rest of the guys, I think they took the day off. So uh, this show is going to be just me today. And today's topic, what I want to talk about today, it's the causes and solutions for the rice, shortages in Liberia, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So wherever you are, hopefully it won't we won't go the full 1 hour 30 minutes. So I'm going to probably try to wrap this up within an hour. Um, I didn't want to leave you guys hanging just because all of us didn't plan to be on at the same time. So this is what we're going to be talking about. It's going to take about an hour or maybe less. Given the interaction and um, your feedback from the comments. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about. As most of you have heard, there's currently, as we know, there's a shortage of rice in the country. uh, I think the president may have refuted that statement, and I think the minister of commerce as well, just saying that there's rice in the country. But nevertheless, there was speculation, right? Now the fact remain unclear whether that is true. There's a shortage of rice, what there isn't. It remains unclear. We're still doing my. I'm still talking to people back there. From what I'm hearing, you know, there is shortage of rice in certain part of the Liberian economy. However, as I said, the president and even the minister of commerce came out and said there, you know, we have rice in the country. Um, but this topic today, what I wanted us to look at, as I said, just the causes, because this is not something this is not the first time this has happened. We've had this. This is probably we had the famous rice riot in 1979. Um, so I want us to look at the history uh, of this problem that we've had that has existed for since the 70s, and almost every year or so we have something similar to that nature. We're running out of rice, we're running out of fuel, we're running out of resources. So what I want us to look at today is what really caused that. What are the causes? I mean, we know the causes, but also to look at not just band-aid solution, but to look at long-term solutions into how we can actually, um, you know, solve this problem, once and for all. Hopefully, all right. So for most of you who, you know, been alive long enough, in the 70s, I think it was April 12th, 1979. You know, the Progressive Alliance of Liberia supposedly wanted to stage a protest, right, because of uh, you know the increase of rice prices in the country. So the rice supposedly was going from $22 per, I think, a bag of rice to $30, right? Apparently, at the time, that was too high, right? So this pseudo political group wanted to protest that, right? And that protest initially, eventually morphed into, it became chaotic, and people started rioting. From what I was able to research, I think 161 stores, if I'm correct, were looted. 40 people got arrested, and property damages amounted to $35 million at that time. At that time in 1979, that was that is a lot of money at the time. That was a lot of money. If you adjust for inflation up to today's money, it's still a lot of money, right? So that's what happened. And I think one way or another, we've talked about this story, because this is not the first time. I think last year on the show we actually talked about it, right? Um, for me, for somebody who works as somebody who works in finance, who study economics as well, right? If you look at the crux of the problem initially when it happened in 1979, you can tell that it was just. I always tell people it was just an economic blunder, like on the part of the minister of agriculture at the time. I think it's Florence. I think, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I think it's Florence Chinoway. Uh, Correct me in the comment if I'm wrong about that. But her you know solution to the problem was to subsidize the local rice producers, right? Those who grew rice in Liberia, right? As a way to solve the problem. But in doing that, what she did, she literally pit them against the rice importer, who, up to now, are still they still have a monopoly on the rice import in the country, right? So what those people end up doing, they end up pulling their rice off the market, and there became the rice shortage of 1979, right? But I think the political alliance for Liberia to had their own agenda, uh, and they seized that opportunity to capitalize on it, right? So as I said, that is the biggest problem that we knew, in terms of rice riot. That was the biggest rice riot we had. We've had shortages of rice every now and then. However, those have never led to, major riots. They never lead to riots. We hear it for maybe it happen for 2 or 3 days, or maybe a week or two, and then they go away. Um, but fast forward up to now, the current president has allocated $14 million to subsidize rice importers in our country, right? Which, from I think, is another blunder. It's another, not just a blunder, but it's another, what we call, band-aid, situation that is another band-aid that he's using to solve the problem, right? To subsidize rice importers. Um, I think what we should be doing, which we will get into later on during the show, is to look at ways that we can solve this problem for good. We can look at what other countries, such as, the biggest players in the rice business, Thailand, India, Vietnam, what are those countries doing, to become supplier to the world? In our case, I'm not saying that we should become supplier to the world, but what can we do if this crop, it is actually the staple food in the country? What do we do to produce it enough that it become, uh, we're able to feed ourselves? And the other question becomes, should we maybe diversify our diet from just it being the staple food, just being rice, to other crops, such as, there's potato, there's banana, and uh, there's this other tubular fruit. I think it's fruit or vegetable, whatever you call it. Edibles, right? That we can actually that's available to us. So the question becomes, what have we learned from this continuity of problem, rice shortages in the country, and how is it that we cannot solve it? How is it that we cannot look at long-term solution to solve that problem? So that's what I want us to. I know that was a long-winded introduction, but this is what I want us to look at today. And wherever you are, and as I said, today I'm going to be going at it alone. So every now and then I will take a break to check your comment to see if there's any comment in there that is you know, worth looking at. If there's maybe a question in there that I can answer, I would do that as well. But this is what I wanted to look at today, right? All right. So, as I said earlier, we have been in this for a long time, since 1979. Um, we can make excuse to say, hey, maybe the reason why we have not addressed uh, the problem is because we have had, you know, war in the country, right? We've had, you know, since 1979, we've had war. Right after 79, in 1980, we had the coup, and 9 years later, we had, you know, the Civil War in 1989 and 2003. So there hasn't been, you can, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, that there hasn't been uh, a long term, what do you call it, a long period of time or subsequent, you know, administration in government to say, hey, we put in a long-term solution to solve that problem, right? Because we had the rice riot in 1979. A year later, we had the coup. 9 years later, we had the Civil War. 2003, and another, you know, second Civil War. So there's been interruption. However, since 2003, right, we have been, it's almost 20 years since we've been out of war, right? So knowing who we are as a people, knowing that rice is the, you know, the staple food in the country, right? Knowing that we've had a riot before because of it, and we every Liberian you talk to, if they have not eaten rice in a day, they will say they have not eaten, even if they may have eaten everything else, right? So knowing all of this backdrop right after the war, right? How, why didn't we, you know, come up with some kind of plan, you know, to, you know, I think the as I mentioned earlier, the plan that the Minister of Finance had, the Minister of Agriculture had at the time, I think it was right, but she shouldn't have, it should have been subsidizing farmers who were producing rice, right? Right? Not subsidizing, not making them reduce the prices, right? Rice, to pit them against the rice importer. So we should have picked up on that, right? But, you know, but specifically subsidize farmers that are producing rice, right? And the reason why I say we should have done that to farmers is because if you know, study, you know, agriculture, or if you study the economy of America here, this is what they do with the farmers here, right? So farmers are heavily subsidized. America is one of the biggest producer of corn, right? Corn, you make tortilla chips out of it. You make cornmeal. There's so many things you can make with corn. And America is one of the biggest producer of, you know, of corn. You know, they sell the corn to different countries. They also uh, produce a lot of potatoes in a huge amount, right? You can go down the line. Wheat, we produce wheat. We also do. They also produce rice here. You know, long story short is that farmers here get subsidized. When I mean heavily subsidized, right? Now, right now, I think the farm, you know, right now they're on track to make about $194 billion, farmers in America, right? That is because they're heavily subsidized to produce those things, and they have the rest of the market to sell, the rest of the world to sell to China, uh, you know, other rice, you know, they even gave some of that food to the World Health Program that you see it during the war, that you used to see some bag of rice in Liberia that, you know, said USA on it, right? So those food that they produce here get subsidized, and they have a huge, massive distribution channel in which they can sell to the rest of the other country. You know, they can limit what comes in, you know, but also put a, you know, allow a lot of food to be sold to other countries as well. You know, so we could have taken on something like that. In economic terms, we call it protectionism, right? So you protect what is yours, you protect your farmers to be able to produce, to for you, your country to be able to sell to other nations, right? So we could have done something like that right after the war, right? Where we subsidize farmers. Now, when I mean subsidize, not every, you know, mom and pop, or, you know, you and your grandma making farm will get subsidized. But people who have the propensity to produce, rice uh, in a huge amount, right? You put in a program in place. You put a program in place to subsidize those people to produce rice. Now, this is not just for a one-term thing. It can be me having, uh, let's say, 10 acres here. I said, hey, I have a 10 acres. I want to produce rice on it. And then you say, oh yeah, we're going to subsidize you to do that. It should be something that I'm committed to doing continually, to continue to produce, to provide rice to the Liberian economy, that the not just the regular citizen can depend on, but the government can also tap into to build a rice reserve. If this is something that is important to our economy, that even threaten the the security of our country, then we also need to put a what I call a reserve in place. So we could have done something like that. Right? Now, that if that was done from a long-term perspective, where we started subsidizing farmers, they're producing rice, we're able to feed ourselves, and we have enough rice left over, we can start selling rice to other countries that such as Sierra Leone, such as Guinea or Ghana. It could become in economic terms what we call our competitive advantage, right? Comparative advantage, right? Because at one point, you know, we were the biggest rubber producer. We lost that, title, if you want to call it that. We could have done that where we produce enough rice to be able to feed ourselves, supply to other country, but also allow the government to buy the excess rice that farmers are producing in the country and create a rice reserve in the country, that in case where these kind of things are happening, you can tap into that reserve, right? As opposed to ponying up $14 million to go, uh, subsidize people who are importing rice. You could literally, what not you could not you could you're literally creating the same problem but on the opposite side. In 1979 we subsidized local rice producers. you know Fast forward in 2022, you're subsidizing the rice importers. If these people, the local farmers, producers, had some kind of union or one voice, they could have, you know uh, this could literally end up becoming another problem again. So eh, it's sometimes when we talk about these things, they think that kind of not bothers me, that puzzles me, is that we've existed in this we've had this problem for such a long time, and we continue to make the same mistake one way or another without realizing without looking at it from a long-term perspective. In 79, we subsidized local farmers. Fast forward 2020, we're subsidizing rice importers, right? I mean, how much is $14 million? How much subsidy is $14 million going to cover? How long is that going to subsidize those people to bring rice in, right? And the reason why I say how long that is going to last, because one of the things that the president pointed out too, which is unfortunate, fortunately, I have to agree with him, is that the the supply chain issue, right? That is causing the price of rice to rise, and that led to this, which you know led to most rice importers are now importing a lot of rice, which subsequently led to the shortage of rice. Is he pointed out that there's a supply chain issues with bringing things into the country, which is right, right, and I agree with him on that. However, if you are subsidizing the supply chain costs to the tune of $14 million, how much longer, how long would that $14 million go for? For a year, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and then you're back to the same problem again? Or are you banking on the fact, or are you hoping that maybe it will last for 6 months, a year, and after a year or 6 months, supply chain issue will resolve, so that way rice will continually come into the country. Is that the tenants on which you're subsidizing that, or is this something you want to continue? Is it a budget item that you want to put in the budget to continue to subsidize rice every year to the tune of 14 million or whatever percentage that equates to every year on the budget? So I, I'm filled with questions as well as you, right? So those are the questions that I'm asking, because I like to look at things plan ahead, 5, 10 years, 20 years ahead, and for a country, we should be planning 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ahead. Yes, every year or 5 years or so, you go to that same plan, you go to that plan to revise it, but we should be looking at problems from a long-term perspective. So this is why this $14 million subsidy is a hair scratcher, right? It's a hair scratcher for a country that have been in this problem for a long time, right? So I know I've dealt too much. I've talked a lot about the problems and some of the challenges that that uh, in terms of how the president or this administration is dealing with the current rest riot. I want us to look at what other countries are doing, right? And or not just what other countries are doing, but how can we become, how do I want to call it, a strategic partner, right, to these countries that are, what I call top rice producers, such as the Vietnam, the Thailand, uh, the India, right? How do we not only do we become strategic partners, right? Because this is an economic problem now for us. Unfortunately, is an economic problem. Is a uh, believe it or not, I could even classify it as a national security threat, because you don't have rice. You know, Problems like these happen. We could, Liberian people don't play with that rice. We could start fighting. People could start panic buying. Um, just in March of 2000 of this year, right? That was one of the things that happened. We had another shortage, a shortage of rice, right? And one of the things the president talked about at the time was people should stop panic buying, because that's what happens. The moment you hear shortage, if you were in this country during the time of the pandemic, people were hoarding paper towels, right? So the moment you hear shortage of something, the next thing that comes to your mind is, I want to get as much as possible, because I don't know how long this problem is going to last, right? But what I want to go with this is, how do we become partners, strategic partners to, these top countries that are rice producers, right? And how do we learn from some of the methods that they're doing that we can leverage, you know, to, even if that means bringing rice planters in from India or Thailand to teach local farmers in Liberia how to grow rice, so do it. If you have to send people there to learn the methods and in which to produce rice in a mass production capacity, then do that. Why? Because this has become something very strategic for you, right? Also, what I also want to look at is that um, not just the long term, not just the strategic partnership, but how do we leverage that long term partnership to become self sustainable? Once we get to self sustainability, then we can go to say, okay, now that we can feed ourselves with rice, we have enough rice in this country. How do we leverage that now to export, to become exporter, instead of always importing, which I think is contributing heavily to our trade imbalances. Trade imbalances meaning we import more than we export, and there's always a negative trade imbalance. I think it hovers around 10%, 10% every year, from the last data we looked at on the last show last week, right? So our trade balance, it hovers around, and rice is one of the biggest contributor to that, right? So let me go to the comments. I see a few comments out there. Let me go to the comments, and after that, we will dive into that session of the of the show. Okay, so we have Edward here. Edward's watching from Ganta City. I think Ganta is in. Forgive me. I think Ganta is in Nima, right? I think it's in Nima. Okay. Moses said there was no rights issue in Liberia in 1979. The opposition at the time faked it with the lies that destroy a lot of properties. And uh, Moses, maybe you're right. I'm not. From what I've read, and this is a New York Times article, not just from the Liberia, uh, newspaper. And I'm not saying they could be wrong as well. You know, um, supposedly, I think I talked about it. Supposedly, what happened was that there was rice shortage, right? And I could agree with you and disagree with you to a point. I think what the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, I agree with you. They capitalized on that, right? Because they had their own agenda as well. So they capitalized on that, right? Um, but I think there was, according to several articles, the New York Times. There was another one by several other newspaper in Liberia, that point out to the same problem too. And not only do they point out to that problem, that there was a rice, shortage, but also the decision of the Minister of Agriculture at the time, and which you know catapulted into the riot. So I want to agree with you on the fact that there was, the POW, if you want to call it that, had an agenda, which that crisis just gave them the launching pad for their agenda. But also, there was actually shortage of rice in that. So I will leave it on that. And you can correct me here if maybe I could be wrong. Maybe there wasn't. Uh, I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with you on that. I'm agreeing and disagreeing with you on both. And Emmanuel, I wish I had reached out to you to join me. I didn't know you know, uh, but we can talk about it another time. Emmanuel Jackson again. He said Florence, right, was Minister of Agriculture at the time of the arrest. Yes, yes, Florence. Yeah. Augusta T. Musa. Augusta, thank you for following us. And Emmanuel Jackson again. He said, yes, Tarboro administration stated the rice reserve cooperative call. The rice reserve cooperative called LPMC, Liberian Produce Marketing Corporation. Did he state that? But the cooperative was shut down. We said it was shut down. I don't think which government did that. You didn't know which government did that. Uh, Emmanuel, if you're watching, I would like you to clarify on that. Did they shut down, or did he? Are you saying that he acknowledged uh, the existence of the rice, that there was shortage there, or did it did that organization shut down because there wasn't any rice? Please do clarify if you're still watching. Uh, so, with that being said, I think that's all we have for comments. So let's jump into the you know how we can leverage, how we can solve this problem. Not just solve it, but also you cannot just say, hey, you have problem with where every year or so you having shortage of rice. uh, you can't just come out and say, oh yeah, I'm just going to partner with these countries that are producing rice, and kumbaya, everything will be solved. Is a what I call uh, gradation to how you solve the problem. So gradual increases to steps that you got to take in terms of solving the problem. So for the sake of that, this is what I would like to recommend, right? So given that we've had this history for a long time, this is this is something that we've always had for a long time since uh just give me a minute here. I gotta shut this thing off. I think at one point you guys couldn't hear me. Bravo. Okay. All right. So given that we've had this shortage of rice since the 70s, which led us to fight among ourselves. As I said earlier, if you just joined us, there was $35 million in property damages. There was also 163 stores. This is from the New York article at the time that were looted. Uh, 40 people were arrested, right? And I think according to some of the viewer out there, Moses said there was it, it was faked, by the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. Um, but again, I think as I said on his, in response to his comment, I think there's some validity to, you know, that there existed, there wasn't any rice in the country at the time, or, the importers pulled their rice out of the market, which led to that, right? Um, so with that being said, and, and given where we are right now, uh, so 79 up to 2022, right? One way or another, I think every year or so, you will hear about. I think it's become so. We've become so accustomed to it that it just becomes like a regular news. But every now and then you will hear shortage of rice in the country. Either that we're running low on something, fuel, right? Just as I said earlier, in March of this year, we 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 had rice shortage again, and the president was appealing to people to stop panic buying, right? So, given our history and where we are today, this is how I want I for I would like to look at it in terms of from a long-term solution perspective, right? We there's a lot of things going for us, right? We're endowed with arable land, right? There's not only that, we have uh, you know however you can measure rain. We have a lot of rain during the year, throughout the year, right? So we have those two things going for us. Now, in terms of the what I want to call the knowledge to produce rice in a mass production capacity, you know, it may not we may be lacking in that area, right? Or we may be lacking in that area. Or not only that, maybe the type of rice that the India, the Thailand, the Vietnam, produce uh, to feed the rest of the world. Maybe it's not the type of grain we have in Liberia, right? Knowing all of that, right? Maybe we have those grain. I'm just trying to lay the basis for where I want to go with this, right? So we have the land, we have enough rain for in the country, right? To that when we plant the rice, we know it is gonna get rained on. You need rain to grow rice, right? Um, what else? You know, uh, we have what we call the bread baskets, right? What I like to call like bread basket, the lofa, uh, the bong, and pretty much any county, right? With the exception of Monrovia. I mean, I think there's certain part of it you can produce, you can make rice on, right? But pretty much every county you can have a rice farm there, right? So we have that going for us. So let's say even I keep using this phrase, even if. So even if we lack the capital, which is the money, the knowledge, uh, uh, the how do I want to call it? The grain, the type of grain, there's a word for it, but you know what I mean. The type of grain, let's say the type of grain that India or Thailand produce, maybe they harvest within 6 months, I mean 3 months or 6 months or so, right? Maybe we don't have that. So the question, the next step become, how do we for a country that want to feed itself, that's if we do want to feed ourselves, if we want to solve this problem once and for all, right? What do we do? What if we, this is something we do what we call exchange knowledge, right? What we send, we look for people or cooperative. I think Emmanuel pointed that out as well. We look up cooperative, not just one, cooperatives around different county that want to produce rice in maybe bulk amount, right? And send these people to in an exchange program to the Thailand, the Vietnam, the India, to learn the techniques, you know, uh, to plant rice, in again, when I say techniques, I'm not saying that we don't know how to plant rice, but I'm saying how to plant rice in a production uh, capacity amount, where your mass production capacity amount, right? We can send these people to those rice producing country to learn the techniques how to produce rice in uh, mass production amount, right? Uh, in addition to that, once they come back, they're gonna need, you know, they're gonna need funding, right? How do we, you know, this $14 million that we're using to subsidize rice importer, we can now use that $14 million or even more than that to subsidize these cooperatives that will now produce rice, right? That will now produce rice. Another tricky part to that is that, so let's say even if we send these people to the India, the Thailand, the Vietnam to learn how to produce rice, right? You know, countries are very protective of what we call their economic secret. So those type of rice that they have there that maybe takes 3 months or 2 months or 6 months to grow, they may, you know, they can't just take it from there easily. So this is part of it. This is where the government can come in, to a part of that exchange program, for them to be able to come with some of to bring some of that type of rice in Liberia, where these people can now come set up cooperatives, right, to produce rice. You can say there's 16, is it 15 counties. I'm horrible with Liberia history. I will make that from a political side. I'm horrible with it. It's economic side of it. Yeah, right. But I think there's 15 counties in Liberia, and as I said, always keep me honest if I'm wrong. You can select maybe five, four of those counties to become, to have various cooperatives in them, or maybe more, right? Where these people now come back in the country, they set up cooperatives in those counties. In addition to those cooperatives, you subsidize their equipment, right? Depending on how big of a cooperative it is, they're going to need people working for them. You subsidize, uh, when I mean subsidize, you literally give them funding for them to employ people to work on the farm to plant those rice in mass production, uh, right? So you now create something, I don't want to say a trend, but you have maybe 4 or 5 counties of cooperatives spread out across the country that are now producing rice. And instead of putting that $14 million or so to rice importers, subsidize that money to those people, let them produce rice. Give it a pilot program for, test it out with those 5 or 4 counties and see how much rice they produce, maybe within a year or so. If it becomes successful, you can expand it, right? You can expand that program to maybe, you know, any cooperative that want to produce rice, right? For me, I think that's a foundational level of how to solve that, to address that problem. You know, so that way, once he's, as I said earlier, I think I've alluded to some of everything that I'm saying here, except for some, right? Once those cooperatives have become successful in producing rice, they can sell to, you know, cooperatives sell, you know, they have the will to sell their rice on the market to anybody they want to sell to. However, what the government can also do, because this has become one of the biggest problem in our country, and it continue to be a problem, you know, to the point we fought our fellow citizens for it. You can create a reserve for rice. Yes, I know you know, it sounds, um, you know, simple enough, but you can create a reserve for rice. How do you do that? You buy the excess rice from those cooperatives that they, within a year, that they are not selling within a year, and begin to build and build those reserves, right? So that way, let's say hypothetically we have a bad year where, you know, we had a drought, you know, and those people didn't produce enough rice to have rice on the market. You can tap into that reserve, right? You can tap into that reserve, and so that way we don't run out of rice on the market again, right? So that's one way, right? And the reason why I think that is maybe the easiest way to do it, that's because you're not going out to buy rice all the time, where you're spending money, uh, um, you know, part of, you know, budget item that is not solving any problems for from a long-term perspective, you know. So that way you are stable, you know, you're injecting that money within the economy. Those cooperatives, the people that are working on a cooperative, they will have, you know, they're creating jobs, you know, and they're also bringing rice in the market to supply the, you know, the rest of their fellow citizens within the economy, right? So I think for me, I think that is the fundamental way to look at it. And I keep referencing the U.S. here. This is what the U.S. does, you know, to go back to a class that I took here in grad school called, actually it was a, yeah, global economic environment. It was a case that we actually did, that talks about the corn law of the U.S., right? You know, this is in essence what the United States does. You know, so you see all these sprawling farms that are all over the country here. They are heavily subsidized. You know, they're heavily subsidized. And let me give you a story. This is a personal story. So earlier this year, I was in Liberia, right? I went to Sierra Leone. I stopped in Liberia. Uh, on my way back, I brought some items. Well, I was bringing back rice, the red rice, that the one that is planted on the, you know, the one, what in Liberia they call it country rice, the red rice. I had, you know, maybe half a bag. Uh, I was bringing back some mangoes, and I think few other items. My flight took me through Canada. At the custom, you know, long story short, the guy took the custom, the border custom patrol. They took the rice. You know, they called me aside and asked me if that was my rice. I said, yeah, that was my rice. He said, oh, why are you bringing rice in the country? I say, oh, it was just for personal consumption. You know, um, even though I know there's, you know, I could have been, that case could have been an outlier, like a one-off case, right? And long story short, the rice was taken, and the custom patrol guy, excuse was that there's rice are not being allowed in the country. I even argue that, argue the AGOA, the trade agreement between Africa and the U.S. that allow, people, if if you see you go to your local African market, you will see those things that they sell that allow them to bring those things for commercial consumption. I argue that hey, I'm just bringing this for personal consumption. You know, anyway, long story short, he did not allow me to bring that rice. And the case is that hey, there's rice here. There's a how do you call it? A law against people bringing rice in the country. Now, regardless of how true that is an example of protectionism, right? So if America is producing enough rice in the country, right, and the farmers that are producing that rice needs to sell that rice, whether they need to sell it locally or they need to export it, they will put a tariff on to some sort of people bringing in rice to the point it will almost kind of deter you away from bringing in rice in the country. Or if you, like in my case, people like myself bringing in rice for personal consumption, they will stop you from bringing rice in the country, you know, just because they want to make sure that the farmers in this country who are producing rice are able to sell the rice, and it is not causing them to produce rice where they just sitting on rice because nobody's buying rice, or people, it's easy for people to bring rice in the country, right? So we have to stop thinking, we have to start thinking like the rest of the world is thinking. This whole narrative that Liberia problem has always been like that. We have to start thinking, if we are literally a country that was, everything we do was modeled after the United States, we have to start playing like they do. To be the best, you compete with the best. And if we want to be one of the best country on the continent, even though we're depending who you ask, we're not even in that conversation, right? We have to start thinking like the rest of we have to start thinking like the US. We have to start thinking about how we protect our farmers. How do we feed ourselves from a long-term standpoint? How do we solve some of our economic problem, not just for an immediate term? Oh, because I am elected, I only have 6 years or 12 years. I'm going to solve it for 12 years so nobody can talk. But when it comes, the next person comes, that's something they're going to do. They're going to deal with. We have to stop thinking in our life and start thinking as a nation collectively. You know, let's say the current president who's there now, right now, right? He could start looking at this thing from maybe a long-term solution and put a plan in place to solve this thing once and for all. Now the next person who may come in after him, if they decide to embark on that plan, whether they do decide to do that or not, that's their problem. But at least he has something in place that looks to solve this problem from a long-term standpoint, right? Um, Without trying to get up, go off a tangent too much about, other areas of politics. But I think this is how we need to start thinking as a people, and hopefully, I'm hoping, I keep using this word hope because when you see these kind of problems happening, you think, in finance we say nobody's smarter than the market. So if you're thinking there's a share of price that is discount, or a company that is discounted, guess what, there's already thousands of people who's already thinking that. So you can't outsmart anybody. So when I come out here and say I hope, that means I'm hoping that somebody's already thinking the way I'm thinking, that hey, this is how we see this problem. This is how we solve it from a long-term perspective. And somebody is already having that conversation to look at solving that problem from a long-term perspective. So this is why I keep saying I hope the current president has some kind of plan in place to solve this problem for once and for all. Start with subsidizing, you know, the local farmers. Don't go with, individual. Look for cooperative that are able to solve the problem, that are able to produce rice in mass production amount and put capital in that in those people's, invest capital in those cooperatives, right? And let them produce rice and sell rice. And if whatever's left they can sell on the market, you begin to buy it to create a rice reserve, and hopefully that will actually, begin to make, to alleviate this continuing problem that we continue to have with the shortage of rice in this country. I know I've been talking for a long time. Let me go to a few comments here. Maybe some of you guys you know, have a lot to say here. Oh, there's a few comments here. All right. So hopefully I will have what we're almost an hour in. So let me go through the comments, and then we can jump right back in and close this thing out. All right. Voila. Okay, this is some of you guys, I don't know where you're hiding from that you can't use your name on social media. This is Sincar Governor. I guess we have the governor of Sincar with us. Sincar Governor, I don't know, even know how to pronounce that last word there. Or maybe that is your name, excuse me. But anyways, he said, or he or she said, the international player will not allow any African nation to feed themselves. Go back to history and ask why. Hmm. Um, how do I even want to respond to that? So I actually want to disagree with that uh, statement. Um, and the reason why I want to disagree with it is that, you know this notion that uh, many, initially I used to think that the older, African had this, way of thinking. But the more I talk to other African, the more I realize that we have this notion collectively that, you know, there's this big brother over us that won't allow us to do certain things or become independent of ourselves. Certain things we do is limited. In as much that that is true to an extent, when I mean an extent, it's because there's also a willpower, right? Without getting too off of what your statement here, and the reason why I'm disagreeing with that, no one can limit you from you becoming self-sustainable. That's a poor excuse that we use. Let me say this, right? Um, Ivory Coast. I always tell people this story. Ivory Coast. Uh, I think they're one of the biggest producer of cocoa, right? In the world right now, right? At one point, Cargill, which is one of the biggest consumer brand out there, right? Uh, was had this monopoly on the cocoa market in Ivory Coast. Like when I mean monopoly, every point along the supply chain, right? It existed for a long time. The only person, the only company in our country that used to buy cocoa from farmers or cooperatives was Cargill, right? But that is no longer the case. The foreign government were able to change that. That other players are now coming into Ivory Coast to be able to partake in our market. You know what it does? It First thing what it does, if it frees up this monopoly that they used to have in monopoly, where you can, if I have control in a market where I can only dictate the price that I want to pay for your, whatever thing that you're producing, and you can't go anywhere else and get any other price, right? So first, you know, they've allowed competition in the market. Not only have they allowed competition in the market, that competition in the market has now allowed small mom and pop cocoa producer to be able to produce cocoa and sell to other country. I mean, sell to other companies that are within the market as well. That's one story. The other story to that is that if, and the reason why I brought that up, if we were, we wanted to stick to this narrative that there's a player, the big brother that watches over us that won't allow us to be sustainable, Colgate would have had a monopoly, continue to have a monopoly in that country. So long story short here, in response to your statement, it is a the will to want to do something. Somebody can come out to you and say, you're not good at what you're doing, but you within yourself, the will within yourself of how what you're capable of. So if we muster the will to be able to produce rice in our country, who's going to come out to us and say we cannot produce rice in our country, right? Now, to your point, I think there's a little bit of control from the rice importers. You know, the rice importers, it might put some of them out of business. It might, you know, they might, collude with the government, do something in terms of, you know, how those cooperative, if they were to be established, will be able to produce rice in our country. But still, we can go beyond this thing of of being self-sustainable. We can become self-sustainable if we do want to produce rice in our country. There's no one can stop us. There are certain things. Let's say the only part I will agree with you on. Let's say if we wanted to go on and say we want to produce nuclear weapons, right? Um, Matter of fact, then in that case, you have a lot of questions to answer, right? Why you want to produce nuclear weapon and all of those things, right? But in terms of basic economics things that are, important to a country, I think if we do have the will to do it, we can have it done. As opposed to saying that, uh, the world body will not allow us to do that. So I will leave it on that. You know. So Emmanuel again says somebody please state when. Okay, so I think he's crowdsourcing for an answer here. He says somebody please state when the LPMC was shut down. I think I know what he's talking about. That was associated with the vice president in Lofa. Yes, and I think I've had this argument with several people of those machines, some of those machines supposedly are still in Lofa up to today. So I think I know when, but I don't know when it was shut down. So I'll be honest with you on that. So hopefully somebody can answer that. Um, so Keita here, Keita say he's here today. Keita, thank you for joining us. All right, Emmanuel again. He said that has changed. Sinker since. Oh, I think he's responding to Sinker. He says, since the end of the Cold War, which perfect, thank you, Emmanuel. African government aren't under geopolitical aggression of the West. The problem is the government forming cartel for rice importation and not creating a national policy on mechanized farming for rice in Liberia, right? In Liberia, the Commerce Ministry and Lebanese merchant for a long time created a cartel for the import of rice, and that's I'm glad Emmanuel actually elaborated on that. That is some of the things that I was. That's some of the things that I was alluding to. You know, so let's say if we do as a nation, or as a people, want to become self-sustainable, these are the hurdles that we go through, where there's this group of people who are importing rice, that have this stronghold of rice importation on the market. Now, let's say the conversation starts to pick up where we begin we begin to favor people that are forming cooperative to become rice producers. So I'm in finance. One of the things I look for is to eventually want to do is to uh, do a venture capital in Liberia, venture capital and private equity in Liberia. That meaning that is to bridge what the banks and the what the banks can go. That means to invest in people. Let's say agriculture is one of the space I want to operate in, right? And I see this as what is not just I see it. It is currently a gap that is there right now, right? And I begin to take pitches from people that are in corporate that have cooperatives, right? And long story short, I end up, seeing one that is scalable on a national level and say I invested money in it, right? The question becomes once these people start scaling those cooperatives and start producing rice on a mass production level, one of the biggest competition will be the rice importers, but that would be from a marketing standpoint. How do you compete? That would be from a competitive standpoint in their business plan of how to look at competition and how to, um, coexist with competition, right? But that would be some of the challenges there. But nevertheless, the 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 cartel will always be there. They will always come out with scheme to try to, make, what we call barrier to entry very difficult for starters you know who want to produce rice on a locally on a mass production level, right? So that will become something that those cooperatives will have to deal with. And in terms of how they would deal with it, that's another show we can have for another time from looking at how to scale a company. um, but that is you're right. That's an existing threat there to cooperatives that will want to produce rice, or local farmer that will want to produce rice, or anybody at that for that matter that will want to produce rice in a mass production. So that's something that we'll have to deal with. So Emmanuel, thank you for that. So we have Jimmy. Jimmy, thank you for the comment. We shouldn't be subsidizing. Thank you. We shouldn't be subsidizing imported rice. It discourages local production by keeping the price of rice artificially low. Absolutely. The political sensitivity is misplaced and must be directed to support local production and self-sufficiency. Uh, you know, Jimmy, I don't think you could have said that any better. That is perfect. That's exactly I think one of the things that I was talking about here, but I think you articulated it so succinctly. So thank you for that. And to without going too further back into this, that was the biggest mistake that the the I won't say not well, I won't say that was the mistakes. One of the thing the yeah, it was a mistake. One of the mistake that the Minister of Agriculture did was that she was subsidizing the rice import, right? The local import producer of rice there, not the farms. You know, initially I would have hoped that she would have subsidized the farming, which I think maybe that's what you're referring to. That way we are, we put us on the path of sustainability. So I agree with you. We should not be subsidizing importers of rice. What we continue to do, you can encourage the behavior. So you're subsidizing importers of rice in the country. If I'm an importer or a group of importer, I can, collude with the rest of the rice importer in our country to, you know, produce, import less amount of rice on the market. What is that going to do? That's going to artificially create another shortage of rice on the market. And what you're going to do again, you're going to come out again and subsidize it. So I can milk that system to my advantage if I want to, if you continue to do this. And I agree with what Jimmy said. What we should be doing is focusing on local farmers and what are cooperatives that are producing rice in our country, and hope give them the tools, the resources, what are the machinery, the capital, the assets they need, the knowledge, agricultural knowledge they need for them to be able to scale whatever they're doing to a bigger level, to scale it nationally or even regionally. So thank you for that comment. So Emmanuel Jackson again. He said, yes, we had such a program, Gabe. All right. He said, in 1970, Lofa County, where the government of Liberia Cooperative was located, produced a lot of country rice. In 1978, Kipama, Kip, Kipao and Nimba County won the prize for producing the highest tons of local rice, uh, country rice in Liberia. Voila. Um, so um, thank you for that piece of history. I didn't know that. My only you know thing, I won't say disagreement so much. The only thing that I will add to that is that I I hope going forward the government doesn't get into the habit of producing rice themselves. Let them incentivize cooperative uh, entrepreneurs in the country, other companies locally to do that. You buy off of them, let them produce it, let them create jobs instead of you getting into, uh, you know, producing rice yourself. Yes, you can, buy the leftover from them and put it into a reserve, uh, but you getting into rice production yourself it's you're, you're meddling into too much. You're taking, you're competing directly with local farmers in our country. Yeah. So thank you for that piece of history. Um, so Keita again, what would be a short-term fix to the rice problem? Sorry if we had talked about. So yes, I did address that. I think what we should do. Um, did I talk about the short term? That is a great question. I don't know if I talked about the short term. How to look at it from a short term, but you know, if I didn't, let me uh, offer up uh, uh, a solution. What I would do right now, given where we are right now, the fact that we are, uh, you know, technically it's become a, I won't say crisis, but something serious right now. What I would do in the immediate term is to you know, maybe take that $14 million instead of subsidizing those farmers, I mean those rice importer. You go to you send your people, when I mean your people, government official to India or Vietnam or Thailand, and let the government itself buy the rice with that $14 million and bring it. And in going to those countries, strike some kind of partnership, some kind of agreement that you will be able to bring, yes, bring the rice in, or allow, you can even go with the importers right now that are uh, importing rice in our country to help them negotiate the price that they pay. I think rice is sold by a ton, right? Um, right? To help them negotiate the price they're paying for a ton. And also for the logistical part, they can deal with it. But that would allow you, you know, not directly, but indirectly be able to influence the amount of rice we have coming in the country. That is, I think that is, currently that's what I would do from a short term perspective, because I don't think we have any mass producer of rice. I think there's what's the Minister of Agriculture has a company that produces rice. Now you can also look into that to see if that, which it will become a conflict of interest. But at this point, I think you can put that aside. You can see if she is able, or that organization or company she runs is able to produce rice um, on a countrywide mass production level to be able to help solve this problem in 5, 6, 7 months to a year. Um, you can also look into that, right? Besides her, I think there's another guy. I think he's usually Armstrong. He's on Facebook. I think we can look into him as well. He produces, right? But I don't know how. Um, I don't know the quantum of tonnage he produces every year or every 6 months. I think the last time I checked, he had a production in Maryland. He has some in Monserrata as well. You know, those are some of the people that I would invest in because he is producing that on a mass production level. I don't think he has the equipment. I don't think he has the capital. Um, we can talk about his business strategy on a different show. I think it needs a lot of streamlining in terms of how to get the product from production to the market. But I think those are people like that you can look to invest in and see how they can be of short term and a long term solution to you as well. But I think that's what I would do from a short term perspective. Yeah. Emmanuel, you've been busy with us today. So he said, open market for rice importing and mass produced rice through mechanized farming. So yes, so when I was thinking about this topic today, that was one of the things I thought about, right? Um, so let me run through this comments quick so I can close. It's been over an hour. So one of the things that we have in this market here, when I mean market here in the US, is uh, uh, when we talk about mechanized farming, we also have so it becomes what we call to the point it become commodity, right? So I remember I talked about corn earlier. So America produces corn in a huge quantity amount. Uh, Pork, right? Wheat, right? So what these things have become, they have become a commodity that you can trade, right? On the market. You can trade on future contract. So what is future contract? So as Emmanuel said, let's say Armstrong, which I think a lot of produces rice in the country, right? Uh, and he produces a huge amount because I know how currently where we are, the volatility of rice, goes up and down, in the market. You know, if we had a market, when I mean market, I mean a trading market, a mercantile, we call it mercantile. There's one in Chicago, we call it Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? Where all commodity are traded on that thing. They trade wheat, corn, beef, um, what is that? I think it's hops. They call it the stuff you use to make beer. They're traded on the future contracts, right? So what the future contract is that these are what do I want to call it? Investment vehicles, right? So let's say Armstrong is a big producer of rice in Liberia, and let's say I have a huge hotel chains in Liberia that serves rice every day around the clock, 365 a day, 365 days. Because I know the price of rice changes constantly in Liberia, what I can do, I can I can buy future contracts from Armstrong rice production. So what is that? I can buy the rice to his rice production within a year now for a given price because I know the price of rice, let's say it's hypothetically for the sake of this conversation, is $5 a cup, right? Um, and let's say currently it's going for $2.50 a cup. I know because it's cheap at $2.50, what I can do, I can enter into a contract with Armstrong to buy his future rice production in a year. The rice will produce within a year. That's what I'm buying right now for $2.50 a cup. And when he produces that rice in a year, he's going to give me whatever amount that I buy for that price at $2.50, right? So what that does now, imagine doing that with people that produce, that harvest, chicken in a huge amount. Let's say you have a cattle farm where you're supplying to a supply hotels or resorts, right? Where the cattle's like people are buying your the quantity of cows you're going to kill within a year, they're buying it right now. So what it does, it gives you the money before, before the time you harvest, in a case of, in our case. So I could buy the rice that Armstrong is going to produce now, I mean next year, right now. I can buy a contract to that. So there's trick in that too, right? When I mean there's trick, there's economics here, right? So let's say I'm buying it for $2.50 right now a cup, and let's say come next year the price of rice goes up to uh could go up to $5 a cup. You know, Armstrong has an economic advantage here. He could say, "Hey, I'm going to sell it for $5 and pay you off and pay you your $2.50." So what I can do within that contract, I can also, hedge it. I can put clause within that contract and say, if the price of rice goes up to anywhere above $2.50, I'm willing to, I can, sell that future contract at $3 a cup of rice, right? So let's say the price of rice goes up to $5 next year. Armstrong can sell it at $5 a cup and then give me $3. In that way, he still wins and I still win. So what usually people do when they enter into a future contract, they do hedge it based on that risk. Not only do they hedge it, when I mean hedge it, you protect yourself in case those things happen, or there's a decrease. In that case, let's say come next year, the price of rice drop to um, $1.50. I could be losing because I'm paying, way a premium over what it's currently trading for. So it's something that we can, and this is what I one of this show I want us to do is to talk about how we can establish, what is needed to establish a financial market, a trading market, stock exchange, or mercantile exchange in Liberia to be able to trade on that. But that's, as I said, that's a different topic. So that is something like that can happen, where let's say you are producing corn, you're going to produce corn next year. I can buy future contract to all the corn you're going to produce next year. And if the price remains the same, come next year, all those coins you're going to produce, you're going to sell them to me because I've already paid. You're going to give them to me because I've already paid you. What that does, you already have the money to continue to invest in other things and scale your farm and do other things. When we talk about financial markets, that's another topic we'll get into. But those are some of the advantages that awaits, once you have markets like that. But Emmanuel, I just wanted to expand on that. I think I went off a tangent here. Uh, Keita again said, how is the West benefiting from Liberia not feeding herself when most of our rice comes from Asia? Exactly. I think he was responding to the guy that talked about, the West will not allow us to be our feed ourselves. Keita, thank you for answering that. I think I agree with you on that. They don't have any incentives of not being able to feed ourselves. Right now, if you said Asia, the Thailand, the Vietnam, the India, of course, because if we can feed ourselves, we'll keep going back to them for money. I mean, to buy rice. Moses again, he said, I was 25 years old living in Monrovia in 1979. You just did it. You say you just told all your age. In those days, there were more country in I think it meant country rice in the market in Monrovia. But the local traders were finding it difficult to sell their rice against the imported rice. Imported rice was sold for $20 for a bag of a bag of 100 kilos, 100 pounds, while a bag of country rice of the same weight was sold for 18. It's $1, $2 difference, but yeah, it still goes a long way. Rice consumers, mainly in Monrovia, will bypass the country rice to buy pusawa, which is, that's the parboiled rice. The imported To buy pusawa, the imported rice. The country rice was going so slow in the market So Tabo was not happy. Uh, so Tabo was not happy. Um, this is without trying to drag this on. I think one of the reason that was happening too. I think we don't understand the nutritional value of the rice that are grown locally as opposed to rice that are imported or mass produced. That's what it does. Um, I can go on and on of things that once capitalism takes over in terms of mass producing it, people they cut corners to maintain the quality. And I don't think people at the time understood the quality of rice that were locally produced and how nutritious it is than the rice that were imported. So we still do that up to now. Even when I think I told you guys about the rice that I was bringing here. It to find it in Liberia is still difficult, you know. But people don't understand that it is more. It has more nutritional value than the imported rice, and I think that's why the imported rice, were able to those people were able to sell it at a $2 markup than the locally produced rice. And that's part of that too. It takes it takes marketing, it takes education, but uh, it takes information. People need to know that the rice that are locally produced is way better than far better than the one that are imported. But they don't know that we always like imported stuff. You know. Uh, so Jimmy Eastman again. Uh, he said in the short term we can open up importation to everyone. Thank you. Competition to everyone and reduce any tariff uh, duty on it to encourage more participation. That is the essence of capitalism. That's what capitalism does, not to restrict somebody, but hey, you're selling a bag of water here for $5. I'm selling a bag of water here for $5. May the best man win. You're gonna compete with me maybe on service, how great of a service you provide, or you can say my rice is better than you know, from than yours because I imported from such and such place, so you're gonna sell it for let's say $2 more, but the market will always determine that. However, the more you open it up to people, the less restricted it becomes, the more people will import rice. And if you take the tariff off, you're gonna have more people importing rice in that. And I think somebody had mentioned this thing earlier that those that are currently importing rice making it difficult for other people to import rice. So they created barrier of entry for newcomers into that field. But that is a great, uh, you know, short-term solution that I think somebody should take that could be taken to alleviate, you know, uh, the rice problem that we have right now. Uh, uh, okay, so I think somebody responding to you. Single governor. I think somebody's laughing at your name. They creating cartel. Somebody's laughing at your name. I don't know why. Maybe you run Sincal. You run Sincal. Maybe that's why you call yourself Sincal governor. But great to have you. We hope you stick with us. I mean, you continue to watch her every Saturday. Um, Guys, I think we should wrap up here. So I'll just read this comment and then we'll wrap up. He said, Carter, they were selling it $2 less because it was subsidized. Okay, okay. Well, there you go. That was why. Uh, that was why it was. It's supposed to. This was why it was supposed to stop subsidizing imported rice. Hmm. Okay, so that makes sense. All right. I think we've gone over an hour here. I want us to wrap up. I think what I set out to do when I started, I think you guys helped me do that. Initially, I wanted to look at the problems. Why we've been having rice uh, shortage in the country, but also look at short-term solutions. Um, Look at short-term solutions, but also look at long-term solutions as well that the government can take up to be able to solve um, you know the the current problem that we're having with rice right now. And I think you guys uh, help me do that. And thank you for joining. And this is why I like doing this show. And I think, as I said, you know, some of you, you know, are very knowledgeable, and especially when it comes to the history of Liberia uh, and this is why I love doing this show. So what I set out to do, you guys help me accomplish that. Again, as I said earlier, this was I supposed to be on here with the usual suspects, the Larry, Depu, Alex. I think those guys have other engagement that they were in. They had to take up. So I decided to go it alone. So thank you for uh, sticking with us. Um, I hope you join us next week. If nothing else changes, if we don't have anything current within the economy, happening in Liberia mm, within the upcoming week, what I want us to talk about are bonds. When I mean bonds, the investment instrument, how Liberia can use it to to you know, fund some long-term infrastructure, you know, and how what are the benefits and disadvantages of it, and how we can use it to be able to fund some long-term infrastructure. So if you know about bonds, counties, cities do that here. The city that I grew up in, Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's has one of the best bonds out there. Sometimes they will raise a bond to do, a housing project, or they will raise a bond to do all kinds of things. So if counties here can do it, you see some countries do that as well, especially across Africa. So it's a what I call a good financial instrument that is out there for the right country and the right people to leverage and do and invest in all kinds of whether infrastructure or earmarket for all kinds of things. You know, so what I want us to do next week is to look at the advantages. How do we go about setting up ourselves to do that, but also how do we, uh, if we were to do it, who do we sell it to? Where do we issue it? Do we issue it to uh, you know Liberians in the diaspora, or do we put that on a you know you know put that on the capital market? Putting that on the capital market, which means issuing it to the rest of the investment world out there, you will need a credit score. I mean, credit rating for a country. That way, people will be able to assess, whether it's they can invest in it, whether you have the ability to repay on that debt that they're going to issue you. So we're going to look into all of that and look, as I said, everything we do here, we like to do it from the Liberian context and look at it from a Liberian context, because the problem that exists, that we continue to have, we've always had them, but what we tend to do, we tend to talk too much politics that we forget about the economics part of it. And as I always tell you, economics affects everything you do, who you are, you know, how long you live, what type of food end up on your table, how long you sleep, um, how much you make, the size of your family, the people that you end up hanging around with. Everything in your lives dependent upon economics, and this is why it's one of it's something that I'm very hence why I ended up in finance and banking, because I know how important it is. But not only that, I think we as a nation, we've shied away from. We've always looked at our country from a political landscape. We talk politics. Hey, who's going to be the next president this coming term? Or this president, this government, this. But the failure that we failed, what we failed to do is the government that come in, they don't look at the economic history of the country, the malfeasance. I don't know a lot about liberal political history, and I think I made some snafus here and there. You guys correct me, but when it comes to the economic malfeasance of that country and the opportunities we've had and how we could have capitalized on them and the things that we missed and that could have set us up to become one of the, you know, you know, uh, best country on the continent, given that we've had 100-year head start with the rest of the, ahead of the rest of the other countries. We've had opportunities that we could have capitalized on. We missed all of those. So the conversation has always been about politics, politics, politics. So on this show, what we tend to do, we want to do is not take your attention away from the politics because they matter, but also have you have this uh, dual perspective as well, that in addition to the politics, one of the most important things as well is the economics of the country. So this is what we tend to do here. So again, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure, when I'm on here, and hopefully you guys will join us next week on that. Do your research, bring your questions, and as I said, that's like Roberto can say, that's my area, so I'm gonna come prepared as well. But hey, listen, you can always think you're good until somebody comes and challenges you on the thing that you think you're good at. So bring your questions, bring your comments, and we will talk about that from the Liberian perspective. And thank you for joining us. As we always say, regardless of whether you agree with us, the thing we say here, one of the things that unique about us is that we're all Liberians, and that is the common denominator, regardless of what part of the political spectrum you're on. We're all Liberians, and as I always say, the conversation that we have here is not to attack anyone, but to look at facts, data, and to help us formulate a narrative that moves that conversation even an inch a little better than we met that conversation. So this is always what we tend to do on this show. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next Saturday. On that note, as we always say, we're all Liberian. Thank you.
We are Liberian. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Either you raise it or we want. Liberia, oh. Either you raise it or we want. Liberia, Liberia.